So how often do you hear, that kid is just giving me a hard time? How about if we change our lens and instead we see that that child is having a hard time? Now, if you're a fan of Ross Greene, you've probably heard him say that before. And we are going to be talking today about new ways of looking at, well, not even that new, right? I mean, there's 30 years of research, but for some families, for some teachers, it might be some new information about what is behaviorism. What do autistic adults say about their previous experience with that kind of therapy? What about positive behavior intervention supports? That sounds really like a good thing. We're going to go a little bit deeper into that today. And we also want to save time to talk about what would be a better way of working with kids at school and in our homes so they can communicate what they need, so we can understand what they're telling us. Well, we are in for a great show today because Beth Tolley is here with us today. And I got acquainted with Beth from when I interviewed Guy Stevens about seclusion and restraints. You might have seen that show a few weeks ago. And when I was looking into the research, I found Beth Tolley's article that was really intriguing, and I knew I wanted her to be a guest. So as we've been talking, Beth and I, trying to get to know each other a bit, she told me the story of when she was in first grade. And I said, that would be a perfect story to start our show with. So Beth, can you take us back to that little schoolroom in West Virginia?
Sure. That was a long time ago. They don't do this, and I hope they don't do this anymore. I know they don't, but anyway, I went to this classroom that was in a house. The school was overcrowded, so our first grade was in a house, and my memory all these years later, and I have a lot of years. I'm actually going to go to 2 50-year high school reunions this year. You don't need to know why, too. But anyway, I remember a moron row. That never left me. Kids who were from the poor side of town, and the town, mind you, had 850 people, so it wasn't a big town, but the poor kids got put in the moron row. And the kids, whoever made a mistake, got their knuckles wrapped with a ruler, and maybe put in the moron row. And also there were these dunce caps. I couldn't remember what they looked like, but I remembered I had this memory of dunce caps. I had this fear all the time. I was always afraid of making mistakes, and from that I carried all my life this worry of making mistakes. And I didn't learn. For example, whenever the teacher would say, "Okay, write your numbers," I didn't know whether numbers were letters or the alphabet, but I couldn't ask anyone because you couldn't make mistakes. But just in the last several months, in talking with my mom, she told me what the dunce caps were. I have my older sister who's no longer living, but at the time she could not go to school for full days because she had rheumatic fever. And my mom was at the school during the school day to pick her up, and she witnessed a dunce cap. And that was when a child made a mistake or misbehaved, and they were required to put their hands above their head, and the teacher put what was like we see now, a grocery bag over their head, and then they had to go stand in the closet. So I buried that memory, for however many years that is. And I've carried it with me. And forever I've had trouble with the fear of making decisions.
Huh. Isn't that interesting? And you look at, like you said, I mean, you had a lot of kind of innate advantages in that classroom that other students might not have had.
Right.
Yet this still was a very impactful event, for you.
Right.
And you think of kids today in classrooms, and they might not be being secluded or restrained, but what about the impact that trauma still has on other kids?
Right. This is what we know about trauma. I was treated differently because my dad was a minister. And so I had special privileges. And when I didn't know an answer, I didn't have to give the wrong answer. I wouldn't risk giving the wrong answer. What I did was I said, I don't feel good. And it wasn't a lie. It was part of, I've learned later, I didn't know at the time. It was part of of that autonomic reaction, the fight, flight, freeze reaction. I got a stomach ache, which is very much an autonomic reaction. And the teacher would say, you can go lay down. There was another room in this house with this recline. It wasn't a recliner. It was a one of these couch-like things. And I would go lay down, and I did that a lot. It was an autonomic reaction. But the point is, kids who don't have privilege, even kids who have privilege and who are not one of the ones who are treated this way, are impacted for life by these traumatic experiences that other kids have.
Right.
And we need to do better. We have got to do better. And we're still doing this with our kids, with the restraint and seclusion. We've got to stop. And that's why I'm so passionate about the behaviorism, because the behaviorism, that approach impacts kids. It leads to, I believe it leads to restraint and seclusion and to bullying. You see an adult who is trying to get a kid to behave through an authoritarian approach, and the kid's not behaving, and you get louder and more strong in your approach, and adults get dysregulated, and they get louder and more forceful, and it's traumatic for everyone.
Exactly. And so if, I know for some parents and teachers that are viewing either live or on the replay, might have a question about, well, how do you really define behaviorism? I mean, what does that mean if I hear people talking about that?
I looked that up because I wanted to be sure I gave you the right definition, if there is such a thing. So I'll tell you what the dictionary says. The dictionary says, the theory or doctrine that human or animal psychology can be accurately studied only through the examination and analysis of objectively observable or quantifiable behavioral events in contrast with subjective mental states. It's primarily concerned with observable behavior as opposed to internal events like thinking and emotion. And then I looked further at what's behavioral analysis. So I looked at what the Association for Behavioral Analysis International, how they define it. And they say that behavioral analysis study how biological, pharmacological, and experiential factors influence behavior of humans, and recognizing that behavior is something that individuals do. They place special emphasis on studying the factors that reliably influence behavior of individuals, what works well when the goal is to acquire adaptive behavior or get rid of problem behavior. So they're looking at, again, they're looking at the environment and the behavior. And as I spent quite a bit of time at the General Assembly this year, watching and participating in actually the legislative process in Virginia. And one of a behavioral analyst spoke at one of the committee meetings, and she needed to describe to the legislators on one of the committees what behavioral analysis was. And she said, behavioral analysts look at the interaction of the child and the environment and their history. We're not as interested in what goes on in their head or what they're thinking. That's how she described it, which was really pretty distressing to me, because and that's pretty much what we see it play out, because what we see is responses based on what the behavior is and not taking into account what the child is thinking and what happened before. We see what happened before that's observable, but not subjectively what happened to that child last night. What's going on in the child's mind, all the worry that they're carrying, all the things they're thinking about. And to me, those things are just, we're not seeing the pain that the child is carrying, which in one of the books that I've read recently is, I put all my books out, so I know what to refer to. I love this book. I just found it. I don't know how to hold a book up so it'll show, but Talk to Me by Emma Vandercliff. It's fabulous. Where she, the subtitle is What Educators and Others Can Learn About De-Escalation from Hostage Negotiators. Such an interesting concept and so absolutely relevant. It's so they're so in line what is learned from what the successful hostage negotiators do is exactly what the kind of approach the scientists are recommending that we'll talk about at the end of this show.
Right. And I was going to put up Trishas comment. Trisha is joining us from Idaho, and she says behaviorism does not allow a child to be neurodiverse. Who he is does not need to be eliminated. He communicates his needs differently and experiences the world differently. Let's celebrate and support that.
Trisha, I absolutely, totally, completely agree with you. And that's one of the major concerns I have about behaviorism. And so the problem, there are a number of problems with behaviorism. And one of the problems is it makes a lot of assumptions about what's appropriate behavior. So someone somewhere is saying, this is inappropriate behavior and we're going to get rid of it. So what's appropriate behavior? I think that's a big issue. And so with kids, adults, whatever, with autism, a lot of the people who are making the decisions have decided that a lot of the things folks with autism do are inappropriate, whereas folks with autism are doing a lot of things to self-regulate, which is very appropriate for them.
Right.
And it's very inappropriate for someone else to decide that those behaviors are not appropriate. So that's a huge, huge, huge issue. The other problem that I have with the behaviorism approach with folks with autism is a lot of kids with autism have been horribly, awfully mistreated because of their inability to communicate the way neurotypical folks communicate. And even kids, and I'll speak about someone dear to me, who in times of non-stress can communicate like I communicate, in times of stress cannot. And that can be taken as, and I have to say with great regret that there have been times when I thought that communication was what is the word? I can't think of it. I can't think of it right now. But anyway, the communication wasn't there, but it was purely a stress response, an inability to communicate because of stress. But it is all interpreted as willful, which is another piece of one of my complete major issues with behaviorism is that behavior is interpreted as though it's all willful. Well, I'm moving over into my issue with positive behavior interventions and supports as it is used in the schools, because everything I read about on the national website, I have not read information that describes the autonomic nervous system, the fight reactions, and now they're talking about the fawn reactions, but mainly the fight, flight, freeze reactions, and the incredible importance of being able to regulate the self-regulation, the need to co-regulate with a trusted adult, the importance of a warm, caring adult to help co-regulate. What I see over and over in the literature is that we teach social skills, we teach expectations, we teach these 3 to 5 major expectations, and then if the child doesn't, it's 3 to 5, which sounds manageable until you see the charts of 6 or 8 different areas in the school. So they're really, what's that, 5 times 6, 30 to 40 different behaviors a child's supposed to remember. And then when the child doesn't do it, it's assumed that the child's misbehaving because either they don't know, or they forgot, or they willfully didn't do it. But there's never this acknowledgement that this child may be under stress, that it may be a stress response. And with 20 to 40 to even higher in some areas of the country, I forgot to take that phone off the hook.
That's fine.
Oh shoot. With up to, sorry about that, with up to 20 to 40 to even higher percentages in some parts of our country of kids with high stress levels, with high ACEs. And then you add in kids with diversity, with kids with ADHD, kids with autism. Then you add in the kids with mental health struggles, with depression, kids with anxiety. You've got kids who their set point is high for fight, flight, and freeze. They're instead of being in their upper functioning in the thinking part of their brain, their set point for their fight, flight, fight reactions is a trigger. It's trigger happy. They're ready to go off in a fight, flight, freeze. I got to get that to go off the tip of my tongue. Anyway, they're just ready. It's not them, it's their body. And it goes off automatically, not on purpose. It's all beneath their awareness. It's a body reaction. And it looks the same as a willful behavior. And they're treated as though they are willfully fighting or they're willfully defiant. And without acknowledgement of this autonomic system and this autonomic reaction, these kids are being poorly treated. They're being mistreated. So that's
exactly. And I wonder, I wanted to say hi to all our live viewers and to people watching on the replay. so keep your questions and comments coming. Some of them are questions that we'll talk about in a few minutes when we talk about what we can do better. So we can talk a little bit about teacher training and some of the other things. I wanted to let people know that there's been 30 years of research about brain science that we'll talk about later. But if you'd like to get some more resources emailed to you about this topic, if you just type in the chat box 30 years, and my IEP bot should answer you, and we'll get you set up to get that email. But I think, when we look at, I guess going back a little bit to what you had said about the hostage, interrogators and the relationships that they're learning to make with people and how we can apply that relationship necessity when we're working with kids. And I think that's the part that is like heartbreaking for me to hear as a teacher and as a parent and as an advocate, when people are saying we don't have to look at what's going on in their head. We don't have to think about those past things. And you hear, it's kind of like the new buzzword, trauma-informed schools. And you hear more schools talking about fight, flight, freeze. But the reality is what really is still happening. So I wondered if people who are on with us, if you could, make a comment in the chat box about what you are seeing in schools, either where your child goes or where you teach. And is there beginning to be a shift away from using the behaviorism that has been so prevalent, or if that's still what you see in your schools? So, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. And what I see and what I've seen on the website, and I'd like to have a conversation with OSAP and with the, and I have had one conversation with the project leader of PBIS, but we only had a few minutes, so we didn't have a time to do a deep dive into this. And she actually said she liked she carries around Ross Greene's book, Lost at School, because she believes in that, which is really very interesting because they are not compatible. The PBIS relies on rewards and consequences. And rewards and consequences, which is a very interesting thing. Rewards and consequences, I'm going to flip over to Alfie Kohn for a minute. Alfie Kohn has he's just written very recently a really extensive article on autism and behaviorism that you're going to put that in your resources, right?
Right.
And the title is New Research Adds to an Already Compelling Case Against ABA. And he also did a recent article about 25 years later, rewards are still no good, or something. That title may not be exactly right, but something to that effect. Over and over and over again, the research is showing that rewards kill intrinsic motivation. So rewards, the draw about rewards is everybody loves them. They're great for short-term stuff. We all like them. So they have a great draw, but they don't have long-term benefits, and they have short-term, and they have, for kids with neurodiversity, the kids that I mentioned earlier, they don't work, and they punish kids. They punish kids who are actually. I'm laughing at myself because I have a hard time finishing sentences. The kids who do not get the rewards are punished by the rewards. And that is where I first learned about Alfie Kohn, because he wrote a book, Punished by Rewards, back in the 90s, which I read, and it just resonated with me. So when you have a reward system, you have all these great people doing great things, and if you have one reward, then all these other people are not acknowledged. Or if you reward everybody, then what does that mean? In the case of schools, there are kids who never get rewards, even if you're rewarding. An example is someone dear to me, another person dear to me that I don't want to. It's important. I think it's important I don't say who it is, but very close to me, walked out of the end of the year. I thought it was just an end of the year celebration assembly, but it turned out to be an awards assembly. And the last thing the principal said was, "Well, we have 400 kids in our school, and we gave out 350 awards." And this person dear to me said, "Well, you're looking at one of the people who got one of the 50 people who didn't get any awards."
Huh.
Yeah, and this is a very bright, but very a girl going through very difficult times. Not a happy way to end the school year, and not necessary. Just a totally unnecessary kind of way. And this is a rewards and rewards. There are so many things that are shown. It like I said, it destroys the intrinsic interest. And there are also studies there's studies that show in home, in businesses, and in schools, the long-term benefits are negative. But because they have these short-term benefits, people keep using them. It's just baffling to me because there are so many studies showing that they are not good.
Right. And I was going to share this comment from Sharon. She said the kids who earn rewards are the kids who don't have any problems meeting the expectations in the first place.
And Sharon, you're exactly right. And that comes up. That's I have seen that, and I totally agree with you. That is something Lori DeSaltis out of Butler University. She is doing great work with educational neuroscience, and that's one of the things that she'll talk about a lot with PBIS. PBIS in particular is a system that works great for kids who don't need it. For kids who need help, it does not work. These systems are, and PBIS is basically a compliance system. That's the other problem with PBIS, which is striking to me because our schools have, and when I look at the school in my state, when I look at what they're, I can't think of the word, what they're looking at for the model, what they want to see in a high school graduate, the high school graduate, the profile of a Virginia graduate. It doesn't say anything about somebody who follows all the rules. Nowhere in there. It's somebody who is a thinker, somebody who is able to problem solve, all these things about independent thinking. And PBIS is all about following the rules.
So let's look, because, we've talked a couple times about there are better ways of what we can be doing with kids, right? And that we've got 30 years of research on, brain science and learning more about neurodiversity and trauma and other ways that we can form relationships and support kids. So do you want to talk a little bit about that research at first? I mean, I know we have, our favorites as far as like a lot of our viewers probably know about Ross Greene. For sure, that would be a website that we would encourage you to go to, Lives in the Balance. But do you want to talk about, how do you want to broach this part of this subject?
I think the first thing I want to say, Ross Greene, absolutely. And I will say, we didn't talk a little bit about how I got to where I am.
That's right.
So I will say that so my background, I've been in the disability field for my entire career. I started out as a physical therapist, a pediatric physical therapist, because my mother told me to go to PT school. That was that's a little bit of history, because when I was going to do a training with a parent, so it was going to be a parent professional training, she said, and of course, Beth, you did this because you wanted to help people, right? That's what we'll tell her. I said, well, I have to say it's because my mom told me to be a PT, so I'd have something to do in the summers from being but anyway, it was a perfect field for me. And I do, I mean, that's it. My dad was a minister, my mom a social worker. It was the perfect fit for me. But midway through, due to family situation, I switched to early intervention for infants and toddlers with disabilities, which was also perfect for me. Where was I going from this? I also have trouble. I'm 68 years old.
Maybe you were going to talk about your connection with Ross Greene.
Okay, so in my family, we have a strong family history of lots of mental health issues. We also have in my family, both of my children had, how do I say this? I've been playing with how I describe the labels, diagnoses, whatever you want to say. And I like the way Emma Vandercliff has described, instead of behavioral problems, conflicts with other people and the environment, and the child, rather than a behavior problem. But anyway, so I say my boys had diagnoses or labels that ended up causing challenges in the school system and at home. And my granddaughter had challenges, and both one of my sons and my granddaughter, the challenges were at home at first, which is hard, and some of your parents probably have had that, because then it becomes, you're the problem, we don't see it.
Right.
My other son, the problems were at school, so I saw it both ways. So my interest has been, I've seen it from both sides, from working with a child who struggled, with children who struggled, and also doing my work in the infant and toddler was at the state level. So I had experience with that. With my granddaughter, my son called me and said, I need help getting resources. My daughter is following in the footsteps of my brother. And in one of her hospitalizations, they introduced us to Ross Greene's book, The Explosive Child. And that was a game changer for me, because that's where I got my lens change, because I'd not been exposed to that. I mean, up to then I'd had 42 years in the disability field, and in the mental health field, and in the school, the behavior field. 42 years of getting help, of working side by side with psychologists in my work, as well as getting services from people for my kids and for myself. I also have had mental health challenges with depression and anxiety. And I had not been exposed to this lens change, and it was life-changing for me. So I have a huge debt of gratitude, because my eyes were wide open. Open wide with this, and it's enormous. And so, to me, that is, everybody needs to have that lens change, because we're treating our kids unfairly. We're treating each other unfairly if we don't understand this. And so that I need to say first. And then as a result of reading that book, I became a fiend in research, and I haven't stopped. And I found Mona Delahook, right, who helped me understand all of the behavior stuff. And I just kept looking and learning and researching. And the theme that stands out is the relationship, how important the relationships are, compassion and relationship. And throughout all of this, whether it's Ross or or Mona, it's all about non-judgment. We've just got to throw out this judgment stuff, and so much of behaviorism is judgment and doing for and making decisions for and about other people. But with Ross, it's so much of the collaboration and the understanding the child and talking with and solving with. With Mona and Ross are just so they are so together. I can't think of the word I mean, but they just go together.
Right.
With Mona, I understood more deeply the science, and I understood she learned a lot from Stephen Porges with the fight, flight, freeze, and how the brain impacts so much of what's happening. And what I learned, and I actually went to I've done a lot of personal study. I studied a lot online, went to a lot of the books for parents, because that's my first thing. I wanted first and foremost to be a support to my son with his family, and with his daughter. And for a while there, that was my main focus. I had 8 months left to work when the trauma was coming to a head with what was going on with my granddaughter. And she incidentally was, I will share this, she shares it. She was diagnosed with autism, but not until she was 10 years old. And that was actually very freeing, because then we understood a lot of things we didn't understand before. So I learned, and it's so powerful to have the knowledge. And that's where I want all of the schools to learn, because you will do better when you understand it. And I have to say about my granddaughter, I had to be careful because I'm going to cry if I'm not careful. My granddaughter is my hero. And in all of our relationship, at one point, I was very involved, like going to her team meetings and researching stuff and trying to be so helpful. And she told me, I want you to be a grandmother. I want you to be a regular grandmother. So I needed to back off and just be a regular grandmother, which is what I did. And I also had to learn how to change myself. I had to learn how to regulate, because I had grown up different. I had my own struggles in reacting. I have my own struggles with self-regulation, maybe from first grade, maybe from my own problems with self-regulation, with anxiety, with depression, whatever. But I think that's probably all of our adults' issue, is that we have to learn, and I think it's across the board with teachers, with adults. We have to learn to self-regulate.
Right.
We have to learn not to react. We have to learn to pause. And that's what I had to do first. Was I got Laura Markham's, who does the AHA parenting, got her books. I took her online 12-week training course. I got her workbook for parents, and I studied, and I worked on myself. I still work on myself so that I can be calm and keep working on the calm.
Right.
And that's what I think in our classrooms, teachers have got to learn to be calm first. They've got a very challenging job.
And I know I've made a couple posts, and so, excuse me, people might have seen them, but there's a friend of mine, Dana Abraham, and she's from the Chicago area. So she has a program called Calm the Chaos.
Yes.
And I did her free training last year and then did her paid workshop. And I really recommend that. She comes from very similar values and the same people, right? As far as Ross Greene and Heather Forbes and, people like that. And one of the things that she talks about is, one, making those relationships with kids, right? And how that's so important. And then being able to have that she calls it a magic reset button that we as adults can use, and to know when we have to step away and say, we'll come back and talk about this later, because, otherwise it's usually that argument. But one person, and I forgot who it was, but when you were talking about the lens change, she was asking if you could explain that again. So how Ross Greene talks about changing the lenses.
It is what you said in the very beginning. Instead of seeing a kid who is a bad kid, you're seeing a kid who is struggling. I wish I had my sheet in front of him. It's
well, and I think the other thing that Ross says a lot is kids do well if they can.
Yes.
It's because they have these lagging skills, right? It's not because they're trying to make us angry or, get away with something. And instead, the lens that so many of us have is kids do well if they wanna.
Right.
So if the teacher is coming from, this kid could pay attention, he could listen better, he could do better, instead of changing the lens to what can I do as an adult? What do I have control over that I can change to help support this child? And I think the other part too for changing the lens, and I know you talk about this, Beth, is that tip of the iceberg, that what we're seeing. So if you want to maybe talk about that a minute.
Yes, that's I'm super frustrated at myself for not having that lens. And let me say a little bit more about the lens change.
Okay.
I think that's also with the trauma informed. But Ross has this great, and I want to send that out, if you will. He has this great, infograph, whatever these things are called, that has that. It's not a want to. It's it's
if
it's
they
not
can.
will, it's can, and it's that's also true with the trauma informed. That has the same thing. It has a similar kind of thing. So we're looking at a child. We're not judging them, and so it puts us in the mind instead of judgment. It's how can we help them instead of how can we judge them? How can we help them? So with the iceberg, the iceberg is that what you see is what the child's behavior. But underneath that iceberg are all kinds of things like what happens in the class might be there might be a flash of red which just sends the kid off into a trauma memory that you would never in the world pick up on, or it might be a smell that you had no idea, or it might be there's a physical pain, or it might be an injury, a previous injury that just somehow got set off again with pain or whatever. There are all kinds of things that that you can only see just that very tip. And so when you're looking at behaviorism at what you can observe, you're missing all kinds of things. And Emma Vandercliff in her book, not this one, the other one, talked about the pain piece when she interviewed she interviewed a doctor, and she spoke about that in this book, who said that the percentage of kids whose behaviors were related to pain was phenomenal. And you miss that if you don't talk to the kids and explore that, if you're just reacting on the basis of behavior. And what I've seen, and I have to say, I don't go to I'm not observing all the classes, and I'm not interviewing all the parents. I don't know what happens. I see hundreds of emails from parents who are saying what happens and that they've pulled their kids from school and that their kids have gotten restrained or secluded, or I'm seeing hundreds things going badly. So that's what I'm responding to. And what I'm seeing is kids who are not given a chance to say what's going on. And even when kids are given a chance, sometimes they cannot express. They're not able to say what's going on. But when I read the directions for doing the behavioral analysis, some of them don't even say to ask the kids. Now, some of them do, but some of them don't even have a place to talk with the kids about what was that all about? Can you tell me what's happening? It's just, it's mind-boggling.
I know. And it's, and I see, glimmers of hope and pockets of where things are happening in schools. Like I have a really good friend, Lynn in Colorado, who does a lot of restorative justice work. And I see more schools embracing that. So it gives me hope. But I was going to go back to an original question that Sharon first posted this morning. So Sharon had said, how are we going to make a dent in this problem when this is currently best practice? And PBIS/ABA is based on an unattainable neuronormative standard that damages autistic and neurodivergent people. Legislation requiring ABA and state departments of ed are increasingly pushing this damaging approach, and I feel like I'm shouting into the wind.
Yeah, Sharon, I alternately move from great despair to hopefulness. So I completely share your concern, but I'm going to also give you some hope. First, I'm going to back up and answer. I didn't fully answer your thing about what can we do. I want to share the things that I see similar from the things that I'm seeing across all the similar recommendations. Kids have got to regulate. We've got to help kids figure out how to self-regulate. I mean, and that's from co-regulation. The relationship piece is critically important. We've got to have, whether it's trauma-based, trauma-informed care, which focuses on that important adult in the child's life, and the importance of compassionate adults and compassion for all the adults. Mona's work, the work of Stuart Shanker, Ross's work with the compassionate collaborative work with kids. It's the relationship is key. The self-regulation, and that starts with the co-regulation. So relationship and regulation are key. The respect, yeah, relationship. The ability to regulate the body and the emotions is just key. And building that trust is key. And then the ability of the child, and particularly with autism, kids have got to have control. And this is something I learned as I learned through my granddaughter's learning from the folks who were knowledgeable about autism, that so much of the time she'd feel out of control, that she had to have, it was important for her to have control of what she could have control of. So there's got to be a measure of control. She has to have a measure of control of some things. So there's got to be the relationship, the self regulation that we have to help with that. There's got to be our own regulation, and this compassion. We've got to stop judging. And so anyway, those are the common things I see across those things. So how can we make a difference? First of all, I want to invite everybody to join to be allies on Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint page in seclusion.org. We are working very hard with this, and also Lives in the Balance. I think I mentioned that I spent a lot of time at the Virginia legislature, and I learned a lot of things. To work with the legislature, you need to start early. Like, I'm going to start now for next year's legislature. I was too late this year. And we have to build some relationships with our school boards, with our local and our state school boards, but also with, I think we've got to coalesce as parents together, and also with our advocacy agencies. There are a lot of us here who want to make a difference, and we have some really good resources. We have resources to document that there are better ways. We have resources to support better ways, that rewards and consequences are not the way to go for any kids, not just kids with neurodiversity. We've got that document that cites the research from Alfie Kohn, that cites, you can click on and get the actual research. And we have, if you just start clicking on one piece, you will get research from others. We at the Alliance are meeting with, we've already met with some federal legislators, and we're planning to continue that. And I think locally, you meet with your school folks, you take them Ross Greene's books and Mona's books and others. You make appointments and you share the research, and you share why this is important and why the others are not effective, and why we've got to make a change. What's happening? You share the data. The data is so clear when you look at the center. Let's see, what do they call it? The civil rights data that's posted on the civil rights data site, CD. Anyway, we can get that to you too. That's showing how kids with disabilities are, they make up only 12% of the population, but that 12% end up being 60 to 70% of the kids who are secluded and restrained. And that's because that's because these kind of behavior programs are being used. Totally inappropriate, totally, we're wasting potential of our kids. And not only, so it's these kids' lives are being so negatively impacted, and they're being traumatized, and kids are being pushed out of school, and they're being pushed into the criminal justice system. And we've got to change that. So when you ask, Sharon, what can we do? We've got to band together. We have great power if we can band together with this.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why I host this weekly live Facebook show, is because it's a way that we can bring experts like Beth Tolley from the Alliance to End Seclusion and Restraint with us as a guest. And it's also a way that we can connect with each other on Facebook, right? And develop some friendships and share some strategies and tactics, because I know individually you guys are out there doing things for your child and making differences. And now for us to work more strategically together so we can really make systemic change. As an advocate, I can go to IEP meetings and I can help get, students the services that they need, but that's one child at a time. And I really want to see how we can make longer lasting differences for all the kids that are marginalized in our communities, not just kids with disabilities, but kids that speak a different language, kids from a different culture and background. I mean, there are so many students that need us to make that lens change for them. So we're almost at the top of the hour. Let me go back in here because I wanted to bring up some other people's comments.
Oh, and I did want to say something about, I have learned an enormous amount from the autistic self-advocacy networks, which I'm so appreciative of those networks. And I would recommend those to anyone, if you want to learn more about autism and about the impact of ABA and behaviorism. Those are great places to find out more.
Right. And Ingrid had a comment. She said, I work with a lot of teachers who just keep on with the hold them accountable statements and don't even acknowledge the research. How do we get non-believers on board?
I think this is really difficult because, and this, I think it was Alfie Kohn who talked about this, and there are other places where they talk about people who get ingrained in their way. And it seems that ABA has been that way for a while. But by seeing articles like Alfie Kohn's, it's very encouraging. And I went to the 0 to 3 conference this year. And at that conference, they also said there are flaws in the ABA research, which to hear it more than once and to hear it at a national conference is fabulous. That sounds terrible, but anyway, it is, because what I'm hearing is before it was unapproachable. Well, in the third place I heard it was TRICARE sent a letter that said they're not going to pay for it because they're not seeing the results with ABA. And what they were seeing is they were saying that the research was flawed, that ABA has always said it's the only evidence-based service or treatment. And the thing about that is you have to think, oh, I was going to tell my little story. I don't think we have time. But anyway, you have to ask, what is it evidence-based for?
Right.
And a lot of their research was based on single-based studies and not meeting the high quality of type of research that is being demanded of research studies now.
Right.
So that's some of what we're seeing now is it going to meet, it hasn't met the high quality that's being asked. If you look at Alfie Kohn's report, you'll still hear people who will deny, just like we have climate deniers. But what we have to do is we have to get the tipping point of enough people who are willing, and we have to show what we have, and we have to be polite, and sometimes you have to move to someone else to to work with. Sometimes you're in a place where you can't, you're stuck there, but look for your alternatives, look for your other people, look for your allies. We've got a lot to back us up.
Yeah, and I think that's so true as far as, I always talk about widening our circle of allies.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess from a, maybe a practical, I don't know, point of view, because I do go to so many IEP meetings, and some of the things that we talk about is staff and parent training and how that can be written into IEPs. And, there's specific things that you want to look for. So the language is there, in the IEP, but that can be something that a lot of people don't realize that you can add.
Yeah.
The other thing is to have conversations with people, to talk to the teacher, to have students do presentations at school board meetings, get the student and adult voices in the room that have, disabilities and have been impacted by these negative behaviorism kind of strategies. So those are some things, but yeah, like Beth said, sometimes we just move on, right? Because they're not going to be accepting that. But I don't know.
I'm going to say one more thing is that I sat in with one of my granddaughters on the IB presentation, International Baccalaureate, and it just screamed to me, get these students to do a research project on best ways of, and I thought, would that be a way because the youth are so good at bringing things forward. And maybe in some of the schools, that might be a way to approach it.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, when we look at grassroots and we kind of talk about parents, but the kids are the real grassroots. I mean, you look at like the social media things that they could come up with. I mean, that would be a great student council project, or, you know, some business club, or for younger kids. But I think that creativity, and like, we know the typical things, we're going to go to school board meetings, we're going to go to legislators, but let's look at what kids can do to provide that evidence and their voice being heard. That'd be exciting. We want all of this happening, right? Yeah, and Jennifer says so much now it's adult-centered results, not child-centered, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot that, you know, we still have to have people understand. And I think having those conversations, I think talking about the impact that it has not only on the child that may be traumatized by negative behavior, you know, tactics, but the trauma that it impacts all the students in that classroom or in that school. So it's a widespread, you know, impact, and we know better. There's 30 years of research that tells us there are better things. So I hope that people will type in 30 years in the chat box, because Beth and I are going to be collaborating here in the next few days and coming up with a wealth of resources for you guys to share with teachers, other parents, and little by little, we'll keep making those differences. So, Beth, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like us to leave our audience with today?
I would just say, everybody, keep up the good work, hang in there, and whatever you do, just love your kids, and just be thankful for them every night. And I just, when I think of my kids, I'm so grateful for how forgiving they are of mistakes I've made, and so grateful for the lens change I had that allowed me to see the light.
Right, exactly. Well, I invite people to come back next Thursday. Our guest is going to be Julie Costin, who I know a lot of you are familiar with. And Julie is going to be speaking about inclusive IEPs and how we can write inclusion more into the IEP. So that'll be next Thursday at noon Mountain Time. And until then, I thank you, Beth, for sharing your time with us. I know you'll be helping us even more in the future, and we'll keep collaborating on some projects here. So I'm Charmaine Tanner. Take care, and we shall see you next Thursday. Bye-bye.
Bye.